finance. What is the peculiarity? Today, it is prohibited to mix a general bank and Islamic bank. There should be a separate Islamic bank, and at the same time, in this region, this is the biggest market. In Kyrgyzstan, there have been done some amendments in legislation in 2006. What is the peculiarity? You can open an Islamic window. There are some activities on that in Tajikistan. The amendments have been done in legislation in 2014. What is the peculiarity? There is a special law which allows to combine Islamic bank and a general bank in a single entity in Tajikistan. Some amendments have not been done, but we can think that this work will be done. And of course, in Turkmenistan, there is an Islamic Development Bank established and exists. And in Uzbekistan, any amendments have not been done, but the local legislation allows to implement some types of the Islamic bank, such as leasing, insurance. And also, we need to highlight the fact that in a region, Islamic Development Bank is working in a region actively in accordance with bilateral agreements. In general, the volume of the portfolio is pretty big in regard to the amount, in regard of the number of the project. Thank you for that. Thanks, Islamic Development Bank. But in general, in Central Asia, there are 10 banks which are working on Islamic bank and 18 Islamic non financial entities, and in total assets is less than 1% in the banking sector, and we can see a big potential based on the numbers. Potential of the Islamic financial will be developed, I'm sure, in a region because it is not fully realized and implemented. I mean, the potential. How can we see it? That there is a small number of Islamic banks and financial institutions, also low awareness of the population. Of course, there is no financial awareness, especially in the villages and in rural area. And the emergent regulation and legislation, for example, when you cannot mix the general bank and Islamic bank, you are not able to open a window, and the deposits and other questions and issues. Why are we talking about the Eurasian Development Bank? Why is it unique? Could it be a provider for the Islamic finance in our region? First of all, our bank is an international organization. We have 18 years of experience, and it is regulated on the basis of a separate agreement. Second of all, we have an experience in the Central Asia countries. We have operations. We have a client base pretty wide. And third, very important, this is the peculiarities of the regulation. We can combine the conventional, the general, and Islamic bank. It could be a general platform for implementing new tools for managing, and in general to be a regulatory pool in order to regulate some legislation amendments. And lastly, what can Islamic finance bring to the Central Asia? Those are new investments, strengthening of the financial system, mobilization of the internal financial resources and justification of the financial products, as well as the mobilization of the internal financial resources, also fulfillment of the interests of the population, and $2 billion of the USA by next year will be provided to the Eurasian Development Banks. What are our plans? In 2024, we will set up all of the procedures for the Islamic window, and Islamic Development Bank supports us. Who are the consultant? It is the Dubai company Dar Al Shaya. Also, internal documentation will be and procedures will be developed. in 2025, the Islamic window will be opened and established in a full format, and further pilot projects and preparations of proposal to enhance legislation will be prepared. And further, some of the proposals will be prepared as well in order to improve the legislation of the countries in the region. By that, the Development Eurasian Bank, seeking to become a provider for the developments by attracting new tools, new approaches in order to develop the countries in the region. That is why we are declaring Islamic finance today. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Ruslan, for that very insightful presentation on Islamic finance and the role the Eurasian Development Bank intends to play. I'm glad that you mentioned the various member countries, which are common member countries with the Islamic Development Bank as well. And I'm pleased to report to the panel and to the audience that the Islamic Development Bank Institute has been critical in providing technical assistance to the member countries. So for example, in Kazakhstan, we work with the Astana International Financial Center and the National Bank in terms of improving regulations. In Uzbekistan, we're working with the Central Bank of Uzbekistan for developing the regulations for banking. We're working with the National Agency of Prospective Projects to develop an enabling environment for the green sukuk. Similarly, in Kyrgyz, we are working with the National Bank of the Kyrgyz Republic and the Financial Regulation Authority to develop regulations for sukuk and takaful as well. So, of course, this is work in progress because developing an industry takes time, but the Islamic Development Bank is working hand in hand, and we have now a worthy partner in the form of the Eurasian Development Bank, which we're sure will work as a catalyst to further spur the development of Islamic finance in the region. My next panelist today is Dr. Sami Al-Suelem, who is the Acting Director General of the Islamic Development Bank Institute. Dr. Sami has been with the Islamic Development Bank Group for over 2 decades. He has worked both in the IRTHI, which was the Islamic Research and Training Institute, the forebearer of the Islamic Development Bank Institute, the research and training arm. Before that, he was the head of the Financial Product Development Center as well. Before joining the IDB, he was heading the Research and Development Center at Al Rajhi Bank, which is one of the largest Islamic banks in Saudi Arabia. He worked at the Institute of Islamic and Arabic Sciences in America, at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. He's also been involved with the Islamic Infrastructure Institutions, is currently a member of the Executive Committee of the Islamic Financial Services Board, and has previously served as the Technical Committee member. He's also a member of the Economic Committee of Awqaf, the Ministry of Affairs in Riyadh, and has worked in different task forces. He has a master's from Southern Illinois University and a PhD from Washington University, St. Louis, Missouri, and he's an author of numerous books and articles in Islamic economics and finance. So Dr. Sami, before I give the floor to you, I'd like to kindly introduce the Islamic Development Bank Institute and the extensive lessons that we've learned over the many decades in terms of promoting Islamic finance and the role it can play in economic development. Over to you, Dr. Sami.
Thank you, Yahya. Thanks to the Eurasian Development Bank for organizing this August event. And we really appreciate the hospitality and the perfect organization of the event. The Islamic Development Bank Institute is part of the Islamic Development Bank Group, and it's concerned with knowledge solutions facing for the economic challenges facing our member countries and communities to achieve sustainable development. Let me highlight in the beginning a very simple fact. The principles of Islamic finance are universal. They are shared with more than 75% of the global population. If you look at the principle of charity and fighting poverty, this is Sustainable Development Goal #1 for the United Nations. If you look at usury, prohibition of interest or riba, this is already inscribed in the Old Testament and the New Testament, by Hinduism, by Buddhism, and many other cultures worldwide and over history. They have strong stance against usury. Same thing with respect to gambling. Gambling is not something good in almost all cultures around the world. So the basic principles of Islamic finance are actually universal. When Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he started his mission in Mecca, he was only one and few other around him who embraced Islam. And yet, from the beginning, he insisted on worshiping Allah alone and helping the poor and the needy. And obviously, the majority of the poor at the time were non-Muslims. So poverty has no religion. From an Islamic point of view, poverty has to end for all mankind, whether Muslims or non-Muslims. Just like disease, just like the pandemic, you cannot be healthy if your neighbor is sick. It doesn't matter what is the religion of the neighbor. If he is sick, one day the disease will be spread out to the others. So poverty alleviation or fighting poverty is actually a universal objective, and it is essential from an Islamic finance point of view. And why do we need fighting poverty? Not only because giving people something good, you feel happy by helping the poor, but also to develop the market, you need a larger share of the population participating in the market. What is the market? The market is trade, exchange. And the more people participate in the market, the more you have the opportunity for trade, for exchange, and for creating value. When wealth is concentrated with the few and the majority have no access to the market, what would happen to the market? It will collapse. So for the market to develop, you really have to involve as much as possible from the population to be able to participate in the market. And that's the role of institutions fighting poverty like zakat and benevolent loans, qard al-hasan, and so on. These instruments help fighting poverty, which will build up a robust and resilient market. The market cannot function without trust. And how to build trust? We build trust with good relationship with the other. So non-profit activities are very essential to build up solid, resilient, and productive markets. And this would tell us what is the proper strategy for building up the Islamic financial sector. I'm very glad that the Eurasian Development Bank, as a development institution, is leading in developing the Islamic financial sector in the region. Why? Because as a development institution, profits is not number one. Of course, profit is important, but it is not the priority for a development institution. For a development organization like the Eurasian Development Bank or the Islamic Development Bank or the Asian Development Bank, the priority is for development, for building up the infrastructure institutions for productive activities, wealth redistribution, and sharing prosperity across the community. So I would again commend the leadership of the Eurasian Development Bank in leading in the development of the Islamic financial sector, and I would like to emphasize the important role of social finance, Islamic social finance, in building the foundations for a successful Islamic financial industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sami, and thank you for highlighting the full spectrum of the Islamic finance industry, because normally when people think of Islamic finance, they think of banking or sukuk only. But as you said, that it's very important to not ignore the developmental role of Islamic finance and the role particularly on addressing at financial inclusion and providing basic services and access to finance to the lower strata of the society. That is where the role of zakat and awqaf and Islamic microfinance and finance SME is very important. And I think that would garner more support for Islamic finance. So thank you for pointing that out. And of course, Islamic finance is also applicable to the banking and the capital markets and the full spectrum of financial services. My next speaker today is Mr. Hamza Bawazir, who is the Executive Vice President and Head of the Sharia Department of the Saudi National Bank. The Saudi National Bank is also one of the largest banks in Saudi Arabia with assets in excess of $275 billion. Mr. Hamza holds an executive MBA and a degree in jurisprudence. He's also a certified management accountant. He's also very involved with the Islamic infrastructure institutions. These are institutions that are responsible for developing the global architecture for Islamic finance in terms of standardizations and codification of best practices and standards for Islamic finance. So he's a member of the Board of Trustees of the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions. He's a member of the Board of Directors of the International Islamic Financial Market and also a member of the General Council for Islamic Banks and Financial Institutions. Mr. Hamza, my question with you, given your diverse experience both within the private sector in Saudi Arabia and with the Islamic infrastructure institutions, would be, given that this region is new to Islamic finance, so it is very important to build the right foundation and to start the journey in the right direction. And of course, there are lessons to be learned from the experience of Islamic finance, which is much more developed in the region, in the GCC region. So perhaps this would be a starting point, and of course, we would like to hear your views generally about Islamic finance. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Hi, everyone. I come from an application side of the Islamic finance. I am working with the biggest bank in Saudi Arabia. So, as we heard His Excellency Mr. Raslanov and Mr. The head of Sharia institution in Islamic Development Bank, the problem is with the Islamic banking implementation is that the commercial banks have their tendencies to give debt and to treat all the relationships with their parties as credit. Now, if you go through the Islamic regulation, it's always you will understand that it is an investment-based forms of finances. Now, this kind of gap between Islamic banking and commercial banking always creates problem in application. I'll give you an example. When you come to the sukuks issuances, most of the there is a classification of sukuks. They call it asset-backed and asset-based sukuks. The asset-backed sukuks is the sukuks that are implementing the forms of the Sharia the Sharia forms of the contract between the issuer and the participants. When it comes to the asset-based, it looks to the credit relation with the party. It doesn't concentrate on the forms of the Sharia forms of the contract between the parties. This is a big issue. Now, most of the issuances in the market is asset-based. The problem is the tendencies of the commercial banks to treat all these relations as credit relations. And to be frank, also, the tools that we have in our hands mostly are credit tools. We have the credit rating agencies. We have the tools of calculating the risks with the customers is mostly credit tools. So what I would like to say is, if we like to implement Islamic banking, real Islamic banking, we have to be open-minded to create our own tools. When it comes to rating the sukuks, we should use different mechanisms of ratings, like a feasibility study of the project that we are creating or financing. Because basically, if you implement Sharia forms in financing, like participation or leasing, you're taking the risks of the assets that is financed in this relation. So, and you can see in the how the debt bubble is created in the market now, and how it is intimidating the whole markets in the world. The debt bubble. Everyone can see this, and especially in the developed markets. We don't want to create the same track of following them. We can use our own forms of Sharia forms that are based on real investment and real market economy, away from the credit. I will give you one example of a real example of a country that is happening today. In this country, if you put a deposit, it will give you 20% on that deposit. So if you have 10 million in your account, you will have no inclination to open any project that will benefit the economy and will reduce the unemployment, and will employ and reduce the inflation. So most of these depositors will keep their deposits in the bank because they're getting so much high interest on these deposits. But and the banks, how are they going to pay to these deposits? Through the borrowers. And who will be the borrowers most of the time? Poor people who are looking to finance their own either projects or essential needs, like treatment or school or whatever, and they have to pay very high interest on these finances just to cater for these depositors. So what will happen in this country? The rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. And on the opposite side, if we implement real Sharia economy that is based on participation, everyone is participating in this risk. If you want to grow your deposits, it will be based on participation, and you will share the risk with these borrowers, and only the needy and will take finances. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Hamza. And I think you highlighted two very critical points. One is this long-standing debate about asset-backed versus asset-based financing. And of course, whenever, as we saw in the interventions of the numerous speakers, one of the unique distinguishing features of Islamic finance, it's its close alignment with the real economy and with real assets. And that any transaction is underrated by an actual physical asset. But this issue of asset-based versus asset-backed is a critical issue. And I think the important point is to see what would be the new types of mechanisms that can be employed. Because even if as we move from asset-based to asset-backed, there are limitations in terms of the availability of assets that can be used. And I guess if we have enough time, I'll circle back to Dr. Sami Al-Suailim to give us some ideas on how we can overcome this challenge. Because if we move from an asset-based to an asset-backed regime, then again we will run into this challenge. So are there ways in which we can still have this genuinely asset-backed, but avoiding the limitations that are posed by the availability of assets? So this is very important. And also the importance of participation in risk and return, as opposed to merely financing relationship in banking. So thank you very much for that intervention. My next speaker today is Mr. Oljaz Kizatov, who is the Deputy Chairperson of the Agency of the Republic of Kazakhstan for Regulation and Development of the Financial Market. Mr. Oljaz has a very distinguished career. He started with the National Bank of the Republic of Kazakhstan, and he's also worked in the President Administration. He was appointed Director of the Department for Banking Regulation Agency in the Republic of Kazakhstan back in 2020, and then more recently he's been appointed as the Deputy Chairman of the Agency of the Republic of Kazakhstan for Regulation and Development of the Financial Market. As we know, that for any sector to develop, a financial sector in particular, having an enabling environment is very critical, to have the rights regulation which is both encouraging but also protective of the participant and the stakeholders and the depositors. So it's a balance between encouraging the market but also safeguarding the interests of the stakeholders from a legal and regulatory point of view. So perhaps it would be good to hear from you about the initiatives and the programs that have been initiated by the agency for the development of the Islamic finance market in Kazakhstan. Over to you, Mr. Orjan.
Good morning, dear participants of the Business Forum of the Eurasian Development Development Bank. I thank you for the first annual meeting and forum to talk about development of Islamic finance in Central Asia. Islamic finance, which is based on Sharia principles, attracts more and more attention in international financial practice. Development of Islamic finance as an alternative to conventional banking increases inclusion and access to finance for the broad population who cannot use standard banking services. In Kazakhstan, since 2009, we are using legislative foundations to use Islamic banking and Islamic securities. Islamic banks can have mudaraba deposits and provide Qait al-Hassan loans without interest, murabaha trade and finance in participation as musharaka, and investment activities, ijara, and agency activities, vakala. Prudential regulation of Islamic banks corresponds with the specifics. For Islamic banks, there are no LCR coefficients and net stable funding NCFR. In 2011, the state Islamic securities could be issued. In 2012, Islamic insurance was introduced, takaful, and murabaha trade operations as banking operations and tax administration of Islamic banks. In 2015, legislation was provided for converting conventional banks into Islamic banks. Thus, in Kazakhstan, there is necessary legislative base for the Islamic banks to carry out their activities as Islamic institutes. We have 2 Islamic banks in Kazakhstan. In 2009, according to the agreement between Kazakhstan and Emirates, first in Kazakhstan and CIS, Islamic Bank Al-Hial was opened. In 2017, conventional bank was reorganized and converted into Islamic Bank. A Zaman Bank was established. However, financial indicators of Islamic banks are at low level, at insignificant level. As of 1st of May, the share of Islamic banks in the general volume of assets is 0.4% or 195 billion tenge. The loan portfolio is 0.4% or 126 billion. And 96% of the loan portfolio of Islamic banks are the loans of legal entities and individual entrepreneurs. 23% of the loan portfolio is retail and wholesale trading, and 15% is construction. I'd like to note that the quality of the loan portfolio is at good level. The NPL 90 plus is 0.4%. The deposit volume is 23 billion tenge. 78% are the deposits of private entities. As to issuance of Islamic securities, in July 2020, the Kazakhstan Development Bank was the first to issue Islamic securities, Sukuk al-Murabaha, for $77 million. In March 2020, at the Astana International Exchange, there was a cross-listing of sukuk issued by International Islamic Bank of Qatar. The IPO was done at London Stock Exchange for 500 million US dollars. According to the Global Islamic Finance Report, in 2023, Kazakhstan scored 23rd in Islamic Country Index and 24th in the Islamic Finance Technologies for the Islamic FinTech Global Report for 2022. The development of Islamic financing, increasing competition in banking sector in Kazakhstan. Together with our foreign consultants, we are reviewing the legislative changes which regulates the activities of our banks. And within our approaches, we are planning to increase Islamic banking with conventional banks within Islamic windows and converting Islamic banks into conventional banks with Islamic windows. Dear participants, the development of Islamic banking is one of the priorities for the activities of the agency. That is why we, together with the government, will continue the work to develop Islamic banking in Kazakhstan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Olzas, for that intervention and for informing on the progress that has been made. As you mentioned, that the share is a bit low, but it's a slow and steady progress. And I think, as you said, that the agency is committed in terms of creating the enabling environment. Hopefully, we'll have more Islamic financial institutions, and eventually that would lead to greater share in the financial market. And of course, we have a representation from the private sector, so we'd like to hear from them as well later on about how the agency can further support the development of the industry. My next speaker is Mr. Dauren Kenbiel, who's the Vice Minister of Finance of the Republic of Kazakhstan. He has also had a long career with the Ministry of Finance. He was the chief expert on the committee sub-department concession projects and later head of the Department for Government Securities, Guarantees and Warranties. He's also worked with the State Borrowing Department of the Ministry of Finance, and since 2021 he has been the Vice Minister of Finance. He's a graduate from the Eurasian National University and also has a Master's in Management from the alumnus of Moscow State University, a very prestigious institution. He's also a board member of the Eurasian Development Bank, so I would like to request him to make his intervention on this session. Please.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, can you please use your mic for the speech? So now you most probably can hear me. Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Kazakhstan, to Almaty city. On behalf of the shareholders of the bank, I would like to say hello to all of you, and today's topic is very interesting. It is pretty close, at least for me. Today's speakers talk a lot about the Islamic finance, and that's true. Starting from 2009, we started this process. In 2011, we have made first amendments in regard of the opportunity to issue some assets by the Ministry of the Finance, and also we went through the experience of other countries, and the second stage of the amendments was in 2015. Amendments for the securities of Islamic securities. So amendments have been done in 2015, and we have decided that in Kazakhstan we can issue securities, Islamic securities. And in our legislation, it was mentioned that by issuance of the securities, we have an opportunity to create SP. We also consider the distribution of the assets, separation of the assets, and also the creation of the committee who will issue the FATFs. So in our legislation, we covered all of those needed changes, which will allow us to issue Islamic securities sukuk ki jara. And starting from 2015, we conduct the monitoring of the market. As you know, the issuance of the securities have not been done yet, but we monitor market. We always in touch with the Eurasian Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, with the missions that visit our country, we interact with other countries, other companies. We ask for an advice in regard of the issuance of the securities. And for us, for the shareholders of the bank, it is very nice to see that from last year, this sector is very developing. The opening of the Islamic window, it is a very nice perspective. And Eurasian Development Bank is presented in 3 countries where the Islamic population lives. And I think to those 3 countries, fourth countries will join as well. And for shareholders, it was very nice to hear that in the Eurasian Development Bank, the Islamic window have been opened and the activity has started. We try to support all of the processes, and more than that, we think that if first issuance of the sukuk from Eurasian Development Bank will be done, then for us, it will be a benchmark in regard of the procedures, documentation, structure, financial conditions. Maybe, no, not the financial conditions, but the structure. Yes, of course, it's going to be a benchmark for all of us. That is why we are happy to see an active work of the Eurasian Development Bank in the Islamic finance sector area, and at the governmental level. We have developed a program of like national development plan where we included more than 200 projects for the amount 40 trillion tenge. And of course, we need to continue to finance those projects. We need investments. And I think Eurasian Development Bank, with the help of the mechanisms of Islamic finance, will actively participate in the financing of those projects. And on the behalf of the Ministry of Finance, I would like to mention the fact that the legislation basis is ready, and together with the Islamic Development Bank, we will continue our cooperation. Together with the Eurasian Development Bank, we will continue to monitor the markets. We will monitor the demand from the Islamic investors, other investors to whom our securities will be attractive. And after that, we will, of course, make a decision. That is why I would like to thank Islamic Development Bank again for organization today's session, for cooperation with Eurasian Development Bank, for cooperation with Kazakhstan, not only in the area of the financial sector, but other projects as well. We actively cooperate and use all of the opportunities. Thank you so much as well for the opportunity being here, for giving me the floor. I wish to all of us a beneficial days.
And one of the things which is critical to the success of Islamic finance industry development is the political will and the support from the government and the policymakers, especially so at the start of the industry, when the industry is new. there is need for an enabling environment and a supportive legislation, and the commitment of the government, both in terms of legislation but also in terms of mainstreaming Islamic finance as part of your development plans is very important. And of course, your membership of the Eurasian Development Bank will further help reinforce the growth of Islamic finance, not only in Kazakhstan, but also in the region as well. So thank you very much for your intervention and your kind update. My next speaker is Mr. Ivan Chebeskov, who's the Deputy Minister of Finance of the Russian Federation. Ivan, sorry, I apologize. Ivan has held very senior positions in the private sector, including the Director of Equity Sales at VTB Capital. He was also the Executive Director at UBS Investment Bank and Vice President of VTB Bank. He was Head of Financial Policy Department at the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation and is currently the Deputy Minister of Finance. We have been hearing a lot of developments coming out of the Russian Federation when it comes to Islamic finance, particularly the recent changes in the legislation and the pilot of testing Islamic finance in the 4 regions of Bashkortostan, Tatarstan, Chechnya, and Dagestan. And generally, even with our own interactions with the Central Bank of Russia at the Islamic Development Bank Institute, we see a lot of interest in introducing Islamic finance in the Russian Federation. And of course, there is a big population that is interested in Islamic financial instruments. So of course, we would like to hear from you your perspective from the Russian Federation on the potential of Islamic finance, not just in Russia, but in the region. And also, if you can tell us about the progress that is being made in terms of the pilot. I also forgot to mention that Ivan is also on the advisory board that is responsible for monitoring and supporting the initiative on the introduction of Islamic finance in the Russian Federation. So over to you, Ivan.
Спасибо большое. Уважаемые
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. Good morning. Of course, first of all, I would like to thank Eurasian Development Bank for organization of today's congress, and for the fact that we created an international platform for the discussion of the important questions. And starting from the very morning, I got a lot of new information. I talked with colleagues, especially during this panel. Thanks our Kazakhstani colleagues for your warm hospitality. It is very, very nice to see and to feel it. And of course, we share all of the information that was said by other speakers. Islamic finance has a very big potential. It is a very growing and developing sector in a finance sector. And we in Russian Federation also concluded that traditional finance has limitations, problems from the ethic point of view, responsibility, sustainability. That is why finances should be constructed on other principles. And here we can see Islamic finance as the perfect scenario where the finances could be set in the future. And the most important thing, I will go forward a little bit, but when we conduct our experiments and launch pilot projects, we can see that the interest is not only shown by people who has some beliefs, but other population, they also support this idea. And in general, there should be an awareness of the population. We need to explain to the population, but at the same time, we can see that the interest is higher than we expected, and it was pretty surprising within the framework of our work. We monitored how the Islamic finance was developed, and during the last year, we amended some legislation. We call it pilot project in 4 regions of Russian Federation, where we, at the legislative level, established the principles of the activity of the Islamic finance. Some specific mechanisms have been created with the help of which the companies who would like to work with this type of the finance, who want to offer finance products, they need to become a part of the register of the Russian Federation. There are some requirements, but they are the soft requirements, because for us it is important to attract the companies who really want to work, so they need to enter this register and start their activities. And of course, for now it is only the beginning. The results are not that big, but 10 billions of rubles have been launched with the help of those instruments, and we can see a very big potential. Those are the trillions of rubles within the Russian Federation. I mean, we have a very big internal market for Islamic finance, but at the same time, we see the potential in cooperations with other countries. And here, for me, it is pretty surprising to see a lot of international participants, some multilateral development banks, and by using the opportunities, I would like to invite colleagues to cooperate, to interact with each other. Now we are in a very preliminary stage. We expect some short developments every year in this direction, in this area. And nowadays, in the register of the company that I mentioned before, there are 23 organizations as of today, starting from the third quarter of the last year. I would like to say that we are at the very first stages of this experiment, of this project. We expect more companies who would enter the register by the end of this year. And the pilot project was scheduled for 2 years, but we made a decision that we will prolong the activities and try to cover all of the territories of the Russian Federation. So in general, for less than a year, we got more than enough of approvals that those tools need to be implemented on all of the territories of the country. As it was said, in order to monitor this pilot project, we have created and established the expert council led by me. This council monitor the situation, monitor the progress of this pilot project, and within this council, we try to develop the strategic view, strategic approach how Islamic finance will work on the territory of the Russian Federation. And we actually convinced ourselves that the perspectives are pretty big in regard of the cooperation, in regard of the internal work. And in conclusion, I would like to tell that we can see a big potential. We will continue to work at those markets. We also would like to invite all of those who are interested in the development of the Islamic finance sector and other. Спасибо.
News coming out of the Russian Federation in terms of the prospects of Islamic finance and the success of the experiment, as you said, and the huge potential. And I'm glad, because one of the things I always used to think is that 2 years is a short time for an experiment of this sort, but the fact that based on the encouraging feedback and results that you mentioned, you've decided to extend it further, and then it will probably be expanded to the whole of the Russian Federation. I'm sure that Dr. Sami here would join me in offering the support of the Islamic Development Bank. When we had meetings with the Russian Central Bank representatives, we mentioned to them that even though Russia is not a member country, but our mandate for Islamic finance is a global mandate, so we'll be happy to support in terms of raising awareness, building capacity, and supporting the initiative that you're leading in terms of promoting Islamic finance in the Russian Federation. So thank you very much for that intervention. My last but not least panelist today is a representative of the private sector, and I think it's very important that while we have been hearing from the development agencies, we've been hearing from policymakers and regulators, it's very important to remain mindful of the feedback from the true players of Islamic finance in the industry. So my next speaker is Mr. Aydin Tayrov, who's the Deputy Chairman of Al Hilal Bank, Kazakhstan. He's a veteran of the Islamic finance industry, having started with Al Hilal Bank back in 2010. He's a member of the management board and financial director, and he's been working very closely with the National Bank in terms of creating the laws and regulations for supporting Islamic finance in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Before joining Al Hilal Bank, he's also worked as the financial director and deputy chairman of the board in Demir Kazakhstan Bank, in Citibank and Noor Bank. He's a graduate of the Kazakh National University and also trained at Durham Islamic Finance School in the UK, and is also a professional accountant. So over to you, Aydin.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunities to share with my experience at this session. A couple of words about the Al Hilal Bank. It was established in 2010 on the basis of the special bank license. By that time, it was the Agency of the Financial Monitoring, and in 2009, some special amendments have been established. First of all, it is a law of bank, the civil code, the tax code, and other normative documents which allow Islamic banks work within on the territory of the Republic of Kazakhstan. And those amendments are highly appreciated by international experts, by local experts. As an example, in many countries where Islamic finance sector is developing, still those countries, they don't have the same laws which will regulate the activity of the Islamic bank or Islamic finance. Well, shortly about the activity of the bank, we had only one case of the default. Before, many speakers told that Islamic bank is sustainable, and for the example from 2010, when in our countries at the moment of opening of our bank, there were around 30 banks on the territory of Kazakhstan, and nowadays we have 20 banks, but 14 banks out of 30 have been closed, and we can see the fact that Islamic Bank was not closed, and it proves the fact that it's sustainable, that it has a lot of opportunities, and our bank mainly focusing on the corporate sector. Final beneficiary of our bank is Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank, third largest bank in the Arab Emirates. Due to the lack of the time, I will stop on the main thesis, financial performances. We can see that the bank is growing. There were some, of course, gaps. First 2 years, bank worked on lost. It was related with the fact that there were many expenses, investments. I wouldn't say expenses. It was investments. It were investments in order to adopt our documents, the requirements of Sharia for the normative documents.
Специалистов.
We had a lot of specialists and consultants that have adopted our documents, our products to the Kazakh legal environment. And so we had a lot of time and investment to adapt the Islamic product documents to Kazakh legal framework. And this process was sustainable. Bank is more than 14 years operating, showing good profit lately. Main products that we have is for financing Mudaraba, Murabaha, Ijara, Vakala. For bank accounts, it's Kaswahan. Deposits, Mudara. We also have traditional transactions on FX and sukuks that have been mentioned. Briefly on how the bank started our work. Mainly we are focused on financing large business. And when we just opened, there was a lot of publicity, a lot of people came and had two stereotypes about Islamic banking, that it's interest-free, that the bank is a partner, and only for Muslims. And that's why our Sharia board and the bank employees spend a lot of time raising awareness on Islamic banking. We had to make lectures for the regulators, for Ministry of Finance, for the agency and National Bank, for the State Revenues Committee, so that more specialists, regulators, and former partners would raise their awareness on Islamic banking. And the second focus was on students. We had training for the students of KIMAP, Nazarbayev University, KBTU, Kazakh National University, on Mubarak, that these people would become future leaders. So that's why we spend a lot of time with students. And the third priority was the corporate sector, people from the business and mass media. So the emphasis, as I already said, in addition to being regulated by a traditional management board in a corporate structure, we also have Sharia board, which is a board on Islamic financing principles, which is reporting to our group. And in our group, we also have a Sharia board. For example, in the Emirates, a central Sharia board was organized under the Central Bank of the Emirates. And within these areas, we need to comply not only with the local legislation, but also with the Sharia board requirements and the Islamic financing board of the Emirates. So the bank works in full compliance with local legislation. Unfortunately, I'm limited on time, so let me dwell on main facts. This slide, we had a very big training for our imams because there was a big interest from Muslims, and we've seen that there is a big interest, and our Sharia board had trainings for 4 regions, not only in Almaty and Astana, but also we went to the west of Kazakhstan, to the north, where we had training for the imams. Unfortunately, I cannot dwell on the problems and restrictions that we have. Unfortunately, I'm limited by time. Thank you for your attention.
Update on the history and the progress that has been made by Al Hilal Bank in Kazakhstan. And as you mentioned, that it's a time-consuming to build an industry from scratch, especially in terms of the need for creating awareness and educating people and other stakeholders about the prospects of Islamic finance. So I'm mindful that we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask just a couple of questions. Perhaps let me direct these to Dr. Sami Al-Suailam, given that his expertise in Islamic finance. So circling back on the earlier discussion that we were having against the need for asset-backed financing in Islamic finance, and the issue that sometimes we are limited by the amount of assets, particularly when it comes to sovereign financing, because sovereign assets are protected by constitution and their pledging and the transfer of their ownership can be cumbersome. Of course, we'll not go into the too many technical details, but the Institute, I know, has been working on innovative ideas of how to make this more convenient for organizations, for sovereigns to mobilize resources in a way that does not impact or limit them by the availability of assets. So maybe Dr. Sami, if you can give us some ideas on that, and that can serve as a food for thought for some of the players here. Please, Dr.
Thank you, Yahya, and thanks to all esteemed panelists for very enlightening and informative information and knowledge about the development of Islamic finance in the region. Sukuk is one very important dimension of mobilizing resources for development and for the private sector as well. And as my colleague, Brother Hamza, indicated that although the asset-based sukuk are quite common, they are facing so much challenges from legal point of view, from Sharia point of view, and recently IOFI is in that they issued the exposure draft number 62, I think, which would require true ownership of the underlying asset, which means asset-based sukuk would not be very helpful. Allow me just to mention something. You know, and sometimes you will find an advertisement, and they will say real cheese. If there's a product announcement, you have real cheese. And then you wonder, what was the other cheese? Was it non-real? So it was not cheese? So when you find real cheese, you start questioning, what was the other cheese before? So when you have a requirement of true ownership, you start wondering, what was the kind of ownership before requiring true ownership? Obviously, it's either you own or you don't own. Now, to balance this, to balance the requirement of true ownership on one hand, and the flexibility of issuing sukuk on the other, our colleagues in the Institute, they developed a framework for sukuk backed by equities or by shares of the institution or the organization issuing the sukuk. This, of course, inshallah, we will have workshops dedicated on that, but this would balance the challenges of, you know, being able to issue sukuk on regular basis with flexible terms, but at the same time meet the requirement of true ownership. And this indicates Islamic finance is an investment. It's a journey. We have to work together to achieve these objectives. It is not ready. There is no ready recipes for Islamic finance. All I have to do, download the recipe from this website and start doing it. It doesn't work this way. And since we are here, and since the region has a very unique and rich history and culture, we also look for a unique school of Islamic finance within the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sami, for that intervention. And inshallah, we look forward to further elaboration of these ideas. I think the message I take away from this is that, you know, although we say that Islamic finance is good and it has a huge potential, let us not forget that it is also evolving in itself, and there is always room for improvement, there is room for innovation, and sometimes the benefit of being a latecomer to the party is that you can benefit from, you know, the experiences, the issues, the challenges, the success stories of people who have come before you. Just like Sir Isaac Newton said, you know, when he was asked, how have you been able to discover all these things, he said that I have done that because I was standing on the shoulders of giants. So, you know, all the economies and countries and regions that have experimented with Islamic finance, they have learned lessons, good ones and bad ones, and a region which is new can benefit from that, and then they can start their journey being mindful of that. So I think that is a good idea. We just have very last few minutes, I would like to take this opportunity maybe to ask Brother Hamza, because this is the other hat that he wears, because he's a board member of many of the Islamic infrastructure institutions. And as I said, the Islamic infrastructure institutions are very important, because a lot of times new entrants are a bit overwhelmed when they say that, okay, if we will introduce Islamic finance, but what are the rules and regulations and standards? And we hear this is many different types of contracts, but the benefit of having access to the Islamic infrastructure institutions like the IOFI or IFSB or IIFM or many others is that they have worked over many, many years and decades to codify and develop best practices, standards for treatment, accounting treatment, for Sharia standards on products. From a prudential point of view, the Islamic Financial Services Board has these standards, and these are developed across jurisdictions in partnership with central banks and financial institutions, so they're part of the global architecture. So if, Mr. Hamza, if you can kindly elaborate on the benefit that the new entrants can get from being partners with the Islamic infrastructure institutions such as the IOFI and others.
Yes, thank you. Now, alhamdulillah, we have several entities, bodies, who are trying to establish a robust regulation for Islamic banking. And these bodies are international bodies, and one of the main merits of these bodies that they include in their Sharia committee a diversity of the scholars of all the Islamic world. So it's like trying to cast the voice of every region in the world when it comes to Islamic finance. So we have IOFI. IOFI basically, you know, they issue the Sharia regulations for Islamic banking, and also the accounting regulations for Islamic banking, the governance regulations for Islamic banking, auditing regulations for Islamic banking. It's very thorough, very robust. I really advise every entity concerned about Islamic banking to go through these regulations and adopt them, as Brother Dr. Sami just gave an example of the sukuk standard that is inshallah going to be issued soon. Very thorough and has a lot of applications that is very beneficial to the industry. We have also IIFM. IIFM, you know, is the entity that is issuing the standard documents for the money market and for the derivatives, Islamic derivatives. Also a very prominent and dominant entity. Their documentation is widely spread around the world, standardized. It can benefit the parties who are entering in Islamic banking derivatives, Islamic banking money market. They are also SIBAFI, which is also giving a lot of reports about Islamic banking. There is also IFSB. IFSB is the other face of Basel, if I may say. Now it's also regulating the governance of the banks and the commercial banks, especially, and the takaful industry. Very beneficial. I think these bodies is very important, and their regulations is very important. They are trying to cast the real Islamic banking in their standards. I advise everyone to go through them. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Hamza. Usually it's customary at the end to ask each panelist to say some final words, but I'm mindful that we don't have enough time, so I'll just open the floor if there are any final thoughts or comments by any of the panelists before we close the session. So please feel free if any of you have any final comments or observations that you would like to make. Anyone?
Thanks.
Maybe you, brother? No? Okay. Okay, so in that case, I think we can bring this forum to a close. I would just like to remind the panelists that we'll have a group photo now, and then I think the chairman will like to give some certificates to the panelists for their participation. Once again, thank you very much all, and we bring this session to a close.
Thank you very much, dear speakers. Thank you, dear Mr. Moderator. Please stay on the stage because we would like to gift you the certificates of today's business forum. Спасибо огромное, уважаемые спикеры.
Thank you so much, dear speakers, dear moderators. Please stay on the stage for the certificates, and we also would like to invite you for a group photo for our warm memories. All of the participants, we are inviting you for a coffee break to the small hall, and there will be a presentation for the promotion of high ecological and social standards in Central Asia, the lessons in the experience of the